Could we move from the sort of the broader view to some of the most challenging moments you faced in the various negotiations that added up to the UN resolution or Congress? Because there must have been points when you said, I don't know if this is going to work. And if you could help us, take us to some of those moments and talk us through.
But remember, we were going to go anyway.
And that was a crucial part of your diplomacy.
You bet. Right? You bet.
No deal means we go.
We had a strong hand. Well, we weren't going to permit him to continue to sit there and brutally occupy that. If you look at Amnesty International's report of that occupation, it is absolutely terrifying. It's brutal. So we knew we were going. And so I don't, there wasn't any. One of the things that I think was really important, I don't believe I mentioned this morning, in the earlier session. There were first thing we did was put an arms embargo on Iraq and a naval blockade. It was a blockade, wasn't it? Yeah, a naval blockade. And guess what? Shortly after we put that blockade on, we get wind. Our intelligence picks up the fact that an Iraqi ship is sailing down the Gulf toward Oman, and we get people saying, "Wait a minute! You put on this naval blockade. Now you got a ship that's running it. You're going to lose credibility terribly if you don't take out that ship." I'm out at my ranch in Wyoming trying to grab 3 days of rest, and I'm talking to Shevardnadze with a military TACSAT at that time, we didn't even have a phone in my cabin in Wyoming. So I'm talking to him from military TACSAT on the boulder outside my cabin. And he said, I said, we've got to do something about that ship, Edward. I said, we got a naval blockade. It's running the blockade. Our credibility depends on it. He says, give me 48 hours. Let me have 48 hours to talk to Saddam or to talk to the Iraqis. I said, okay, I'll see what I can do. I was talking to President Bush. President Bush said, look, a lot of people want to take that ship out. Prime Minister Thatcher thinks we're going to be really in trouble if we don't do it. Secretary of Defense thinks we need to do it. National Security Advisor thinks we need to do it. Everybody thinks we need to do it. I said, let me tell you something, pal. I said, I think we still have 2 days within which we can take that ship out. We've just succeeded in getting the Soviets to come along and support the idea we ought to reverse this aggression. We don't need to act precipitously when we can act in another couple of days and take care of it. The president went with me. Gets back to what I said earlier about the relationship you need to have with your president. He went with me because we'd been friends for 35 years. He trusted me. I had been his political campaign manager, all that stuff. So that was a critical point. I was way out in Wyoming. I wasn't even there where I could argue the case personally in front of him. He went with me. And the coalition stayed intact. And we gave them their 2 days, and I can't remember what happened. I don't remember whether the ship was turned around or whether we took it out, but we gave them their 2 days.
And there, your eye was on, let's hold this coalition together.
Absolutely.
The first order of business is keep the Soviets in. If we have to take a modest hit on the ship, so be it. But keep that coalition together.
Absolutely. Well, it wasn't much of a hit. I mean, it was a ship that was sailing. We knew we had 2 days within which we could torpedo it.
So another moment or challenge that must have been tough. Ultimately, the Chinese abstained.
That was a hard one.
Can you take us through the actions before?
Chinese are very tough. They're very tough. They are tough to negotiate with. They are somewhat inscrutable sometimes. And I'd really been working this one with Chun Chi-chen, who was, by the way, a good person and a fine foreign minister of the People's Republic of China. But this was in the aftermath of Tiananmen. And Tiananmen Square had strained the relationship, but President Bush had been our first representative in China. And he knew how important this relationship was, and he was doing everything he could to keep it together. And the Chinese appreciated that. We did put some sanctions on them, but they were modest sanctions, and the relationship was not totally ruptured, but it was under strain. And I was dealing not just with Chen Chi-chen, the foreign minister, but also with Li Peng, the prime minister, who was a hardline guy. And they were of a mind that they were not going to support action against a member state of the Soviet Union. The use of force, the UN against a member state of the Soviet Union, a member state of the UN, we can't do that. And I never will forget on several occasions, trying to get him to agree to abstain. I said, well, if you can't vote for this, how about abstaining? And we had to negotiate a deal whereby we would agree to receive a high-level Chinese visitor in Washington as a quid pro quo for their abstaining. And this was right in the aftermath of Tiananmen, and it wasn't very popular in the United States then for us to be receiving a high-level Chinese visitor. But we did it, and we got them to abstain.